Now, let's move on. Former Australian state fire chiefs got together today and they're going to take matters into their own hands. They're very frustrated that they couldn't get a personal audience with the Prime Minister. So they're organising their own emergency summit on the bushfire season. These are former fire chiefs. And this, of course, occurs as fire continues to devastate communities. The former fire chiefs say the PM has failed to show leadership and has refused to meet with them. Now, I don't know whether it's because they haven't got their magnificent audience with the Prime Minister and the nice biscuits and a nice cup of tea, but they're quite derogatory towards the Prime Minister. Liz, let's have a quick listen to one of the fire chiefs earlier today.
We have no moral leadership, as we saw in Madrid. The bushfires weren't even mentioned. Other countries were aghast that while Australia burns, our government went over there and argued against tougher emission standards.
I can feel the tsunami of public opinion rolling on towards Canberra.
Our leadership is asleep at the wheel. In fact, in some areas, I think it's on life support. We need leaders to step up to this, and we would love them to take this initiative on their own bat.
Now, Liz, right at the front of that statement from I think it was Greg Mullins from New South Wales, this is where they tripped themselves up. Here they are saying, oh, we've got a bushfire crisis, and look what Australia did. They didn't commit to reducing more emissions. Now, if these clowns think that we can reduce our emissions, maybe we reduce them to zero tomorrow, and of course the whole country falls on its knees. Let's just say we do that. The chief scientist in Australia, as I've said 180 times, says that we will not change the temperature of the planet, therefore we will not reduce the number of bushfires. They don't get that. Why aren't they doing their homework, these people?
Look, they are absolutely determined to push this agenda, and we've seen this time and time again of late. People mentioning the bushfires, blaming it on climate change. It's become very, very, very tiresome for those of us who don't believe that line of argument. I mean, as we've also said 180 times plus, Australia has always had bushfires. We will always have bushfires. We're a very hot island. Half of our mainland is uninhabitable desert. We're very hot. We're drought prone. We've always had bushfires. We always will. Times have not changed. This is not linked to climate change. And as our Prime Minister himself has said, the same Prime Minister these guys are so upset they didn't get a meeting with, it bears mentioning that they did meet with two senior cabinet ministers, two very relevant cabinet ministers. I don't know that their meeting, getting a hearing with the PM would change anything. It just seems like a tanty, to be honest. But as the PM has come out and said quite a few times now, we're not responsible enough for enough emissions to, as you say, if we cease them tomorrow, nothing's going to happen. Nothing's going to change.
Exactly.
So,
Warren Mundine,
it's unhelpful.
It is unhelpful, but they get a little bit of credibility if they turned around at a press conference and said, we need to resource bushfire volunteer brigades right across Australia much more because it's dry out there. Now, that we understand, and they actually might get an audience with the Prime Minister.
Yeah, but they're also all over the shot. Like, he made this comment and he said, you've got to read the scientific papers, you realise they're all to do with climate change. And then a little bit later he says it's fascinating to hear the language being used around the debate with critics suggesting climate change doesn't cause bushfires. Of course climate change doesn't cause bushfires. No one is suggesting that. And I'm sitting there going, wait a minute, what is it? You're this way or you're that way? And look, look, their name gives themselves away in regard to this whole process. Look, I wrote an article a couple of weeks ago about this. I said, look, we've got to take... Aboriginals have lived in this country for thousands of years. We went through bushfires, we went through the Ice Age, we went through the oceans rising and that fact, and lowering. You know, you could have walked to Papua New Guinea, some of my ancestors could at one stage. But we survived all that because we were able to do the things that we needed to do in regard to the bushfires. Now, these people, and he says it doesn't have nothing to do with the Greens. Well, the Greens have actually stopped us from actually doing these things. amazing. In fact, I know Aboriginals in Northern Australia who do those fire cleaning stuff, so that in the winter time when you're supposed to do it, so the summer you have less fires and not large fires, and they went out and demonstrated to stop them from doing these things. Yeah. And you see those roads where the fire brigades, the rural fire service and that use, they've got big cement blocks across them now. They're stopping the fireys from getting... It's
ludicrous.
And these guys are in charge of this area. Yeah. The more and more they get out and whinge and complain about this and carry on and confuse us, it's about climate change. No, it's not about climate change. Then, you know, no wonder they haven't got a meeting with the Prime Minister.
And no wonder we can't fight fires appropriately. A bunch of Melbourne vegans have had their charity status revoked after starring in a number of unsightly protests recently. Vegans Rising won't be happy, Jan. I'm not saying you're Jan, Liz, but Liz, don't they appreciate the clear difference between a charity and a protest group?
Clearly not. I've got to take my hat off to whoever's at the helm of the ACNC these days. They are a jolly legend. So this week it was Vegans Rising. Last week we heard whispers of Greenpeace also getting their charity status revoked. And last month we saw Aussie Farms get their charity status revoked. Much like this group, they're hardcore vegans, terrorising farmers, terrorising abattoirs, locking down cities for hours on end. These guys are fakers, and it's like Christmases come early with our government weeding these guys out one by one, no longer to carry on like the anarchists they are under the name of a charity.
Yeah, exactly. Look, at the end of the day, they want the world to become a vegan empire, and their strategy and their tactics is just gross, so they get what they deserve.